Hey, Slick Talkers, thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. And I know that if you love this show, you'll also love my morning show called Good Morning Hospitality with my co hosts Michael Golden and Brandy Canali, as we spend 30 minutes every Monday morning to dive into the industry's top latest news and trending topics. So go check it out on wherever you find your podcasts at Good Morning Hospitality. And you can live stream with us on Monday mornings on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, YouTube. Now, I hope you enjoy this episode. What's up, everybody? Your host, Will Slickers here. I'm so sorry for the delay on this bonus episode. Plus, I also know I've thrown a lot of content at you guys this week, but I've also been a little bit under the weather this weekend and didn't get this episode out when I wanted to. So just apologize in advance for that, but be ready for a lot of content to come out from Slick Talk as well as the Hospitality.fm network. If you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter or joined us on the website, you can find all of the podcasts that we are producing and working with. We have about 30 shows signed. Not all of them are on the website, but we have a lot of cool changes coming. So this episode is a bonus episode with Chris Adams, who is a previous guest from Slick Talk. And if you haven't heard that episode, I'm going to make sure to tag it in the show notes. Definitely give it a listen. It was one of my favorites I've done probably in the last year or so. But Chris really brings a new and challenging perspective for me, because as a media person, sometimes I see things differently. And to hear some of the content and the comments he made really made me think differently and understand how things are really going. And it was really cool. So thankful for Chris Adams, who is one of the co-founders of the Ellis Adams Group, to join me on the Spotify Live in our series of the industry from our perspectives. Big shout out to all of our sponsors that make this podcast possible. And I'm super, super excited for all of you to listen. So thanks again and enjoy the episode. You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. This episode is brought to you by my friends at Hostfully, and if you're a property manager anywhere in the country, then you definitely need to look at joining Hostfully for their property management software or their digital guidebooks, because we all know that streamlining your operations as a property management company or a host can be super difficult and time consuming, and this is the tool that helps you take care of that and earn back time from your day and to actually have a life. So if you haven't already, go to hostfully.com, use my code SlickTalk20 and make sure that you have that ready to go, because it will be a game changer for you. So go ahead, go to the link in the show notes, hostfully.com, use code SlickTalk20 and enjoy having some time back in your life. And now back to the episode. All right, everybody, we are back with a Spotify Live series. I'm their host, Will Slickers, who is the host of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. And I'm joined by a good friend who is a previous podcast guest, Chris Adams. Welcome, my friend. Good to see you again.
Man, excited to be here. It's my first time on Spotify Live, so I'm trying to handle this, trying to figure it out.
Trust me, this is my second time, so it's going to either be really good or really brutal for the learning curve. We'll find out. But really excited to have you on, and thank you for taking the faith and the trust of joining me on a Spotify Live. I was an early adopter with Clubhouse, but as much of a big fanboy I am for Spotify, I just had to move over to this platform and see what the hype was about. But for anyone who's listening to the replay or maybe even joining us live here in a bit, do you want to give us a quick background and intro to yourself for maybe those who maybe haven't heard your episode on Slick Talk?
Yeah, of course. I am, our whole company is focused on the hospitality industry. really from a really the luxury lifestyle segment is, I guess you would say, our bread and butter. It's our forte. My background, I started with Ritz-Carlton hotels, and that was really it created the foundation, I guess, for how my company's been built. And 20 years later, we're continuing to push the envelope and kind of do things outside the box. And we're really an encompassing firm that does everything from concept development and the design side all the way down to boots on the ground and really space activation and helping clients storytell, right? How do we take their message and make sure that we're putting the right narrative around it and bringing it to life and activating it and creating those moments and experiences for their guest. And that's it's our 22nd, I guess you could say, snapshot of who we are.
So you guys do also not just come up with the concepts, the design, the branding, but you also get the operations in play.
Yeah, and I think it's been a huge win for us. There's so many amazing designers out there that design gorgeous projects, and I think the one thing that sets us apart is the fact that we have an entire division of our company that are operators, and they come from the operation. And so when we design, we get our operators involved in that process to really make sure that we're not just designing from an aesthetic standpoint, but are we making sure that functionally our clients are able to drive revenue and create those moments for guests? There's nothing worse than getting into a beautiful space and, it's tough to do your job in it. And so I think that's one of the things that's really helped set us apart from design and then combining the operations piece.
I love that. And you would think that would be something that would probably be more adapted or adopted in the space. I remember just like a funny side story is that we were going through this like remodel with this, I think it was 10,000 square foot type castle property on the lake. And the big thing is that the owner was all excited about this design work and the type of amenities and the kitchen appliances, and the way they were flowing it was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much pain for the guest because it just doesn't make sense. Great idea, great inspiration, which we were able to take. But from the operations standpoint, we're like, man, housekeeping is going to have a hassle with this. The guest is going to be uncomfortable. So it's really cool to see that you guys can take that creativity and then power it with legit operation input.
Yeah, it's a huge win, man. And it's funny when you start thinking about what's going on in our industry right now. These little details of, you just said, housekeeping's going to hate this, or this is going to be a real struggle for the operations team. I mean, that has to play into the fact that we're continuing to struggle from a labor standpoint. And those little things add up to big things. And so, we really push hard and believe that even all the way down to coming up with these designs and how they're designed makes it a better work environment for our operations teams, which hopefully is one more piece of the puzzle that they need to keep them engaged. There's a lot more that's gonna be needed, but it's one more thing that hopefully is an added value to help keep people and enjoy what they're doing and stay passionate about it.
I love that. And I guess a random question that just kind of comes to mind, though, is there a perfect balance of design and operational workflow, compatibility with a property when it comes to like cleaning surfaces or the flooring or the placement of furniture or design when it comes to maybe an island table or whatever that may be? Is there a perfect balance for that at all? Or have you seen an example of a perfect balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all strive for it. I always say, anytime we design something, it's if you've ever built a house and you had the opportunity to kind of design it yourself in some form or fashion, and you think you're designing your dream home, and then you get in there and realize, damn it, I wish I'd have put a closet here, or I wish I would have expanded this to the other side. So I don't think you'll ever find a time where something's perfect, but I think that we definitely strive to find that balance between making sure that it's visually, aesthetically telling the story for the guest, but just you're able to actually activate and you're able to functionally operate your operation. at a high level, super efficient, that's creating amazing moments for your guest. And we have to think about that from a design perspective. Otherwise, we completely miss the mark. And then, you see these places that you win an award in a magazine because it looks great, but it's just brutal to actually operate it. And finding that balance between the two is crucial.
100%. And you've mentioned a couple things so far that have actually kind of brought another story from kind of some past work experience for me. And you mentioned storytelling. And I think storytelling is really important from the guest perspective. But I remember an operator that I worked for right when I moved to the Oregon coast, was just leaving my, entry position as a front desk agent to become supervisor, manager, all the above. And the ability that they had to, story tell, not just to the guest, but to the staff. They told the story so well of the business and the brand and the concept and the mission that every staff member was able to authentically and passionately pass that story down to their guests that they were serving. And it made it way more exciting, way more fun. So I think just from my understanding, because we're going to get into the labor shortage and kind of going into talking about, retention and growth and investment into the future. But, that's one big thing is if you can storytell to the guests, then you should also be storytelling to your staff and your team, because they're going to carry that passionately through.
Well, I mean, the reality is our teams are the ones that have to be telling the story. The owner that knows the story, that's great and all, but they're not touching the guest. I mean, the reality is I need my front desk agent, I need my concierge, I need my host and all of my team on the floor to be able to convey that message and that story literally probably better than the owner can. And, many times that's the missed piece, I guess you would say. That doesn't happen, and the guests feel the effects of it. So, somewhere there's a really cool concept narrative in a deck somewhere that's been floating around between design firm, branding, and ownership group. But are we really conveying that message to our teams so they're able to translate it into, the way that they would describe it, to make sure? I mean, how many times have we gone to a place and you ask the front desk or you ask somebody about the restaurant in a hotel, let's say, and by the time you get to the restaurant itself, you've heard it was Mediterranean, you heard it was a seafood restaurant, you heard it was a steak. I mean, you get 30 different interpretations of what this restaurant is, because no one really knows what the story is and no one's conveyed that to them. So they're creating their own narrative, and that's a tough place to be.
I totally agree. Well, let's getting into, concepts and buildings that you and your team have done. How many, since our last episode together, how many brands have you guys opened up this year? Let's maybe even 2021 and then the start to 2022, if you're able to separate the dates.
We have done first quarter this year, over 50 projects that we've opened, activated, remodeled something in some form or fashion. Definitely over 50.
Wow. So with that, when it comes to the state of the industry from our eyes, right? This is kind of the theme of the conversation. Have things recovered or gotten better now that most places are open and have less limiting restrictions and mandates, especially maybe through that current 50 that you just mentioned? How has that been when it comes to actual occupancy and revenue and actual guest experience and moments for your team?
It's different. I think the biggest struggle now is, things have opened back up, which is great, right? That means that prayerfully we're on the other side of this pandemic. The bad part, the struggle part is we got guests that are chomping at the bit to come and enjoy and be at our locations. Do we have team members that can take care of them? And when the team members that we have, are they too stretched? Are they having to do too much? Are we able to open all of our operations? I mean, I know hotels that we're dealing with where they've got multiple outlets on property and they're running 80, 90, 100% occupancy, yet they can't open all their outlets because they just don't have the team members to do it. So now the guests are coming saying, man, we're here, we want to spend money, but we don't have the ability to create that experience for them that they're expecting. especially at the rates that they're paying. I mean, I'll be honest with you, the rates that our guests are paying are higher than pre-pandemic. The ADRs are higher, the cost of goods are higher, which means that translates to our restaurant and bar operations. So the price has gone up on everything, yet it's really difficult to deliver an elevated experience at the same time. So it's a massive disconnect. So, has it gotten better? Yeah, things have gotten better from the standpoint that, a lot of the bread were not as, what's the word? They pulled back on the things that we can't do. So, mandates and mask mandates and all these things, but I don't know that it's gotten any better from a guest perspective. And at the properties, it's a struggle right now on figuring out how to take care of these guests that are coming out that want to be at our hotels.
100% agreed. And this is kind of something that we talked about on the first Spotify Live. I don't know if you know Steve Turk. He's based out in Miami, but been connected with the Lowe's Hotel and all this other stuff. And the big thing is that we're seeing, these crazy rates, this crazy amount especially for a room, granted, I understand there's service behind it. But we've just been seeing some crazy numbers. People are paying it, but I loved your Forbes article. Maybe we can just skip to that kind of talking point, but your Forbes article about, how does a worldwide industry pivot and change? And right now with I guess, can I ask you with these types of properties, I know your luxury brand is exactly kind of where you guys are honing in. But how are some different ways for these operators with the lack of staff to continue to provide that service, especially with those increasingly high rates? Obviously, if there's not as much staff, but the rates are high, then that must mean the profit must be higher, unless they're refunding like crazy because of the lack of staffing and guests, having complaints. But is there anything like standing out from an operations perspective to kind of help this?
There's a few things. One is, I think owners are still trying to recover, right? So when you say their profits are higher, the margins might be better, but all they're trying to do is recover from the past 2 years, right? So it's not like they're just making tons of money and, living the good life necessarily. It's how do we recover what happened over the past 2 years? On the flip side, what you were just saying is, how do we think differently? Right. The reality is we have guests that are wanting these experiences. They're coming out to enjoy these properties, but we don't have the teams to do it. So what do we do? And, I think that's the biggest struggle that properties have right now is their ability. And the bigger you get, the tougher it is to kind of transition quickly. Right. And I think that's what the struggle is right now is their ability to think outside the box and look for new ways of doing things that might be more efficient. It might take less labor to get it done. It might be different. It might be, that learning curve might be a struggle on the front end, but it's going to help you in the long run. And I think that's where the challenge is right now is the ability to stop saying that's how we've always done it, to really transition to this is new. And I hate using new norm, but what are we doing differently to make sure that we're meeting our guests where they're at based on the situation that we're currently in? And I think that is a big struggle with our properties right now. And when we start digging into that and we have these conversations of what are we going to do? How do we get people to come back to the industry? How do we find more staff? I continue to beat the drum of, are we really focusing our attention on the culture that we're establishing within our hotels? I look at brands like Marriott, Ritz-Carlton that have an amazing culture, right? But I need to make sure that culture is funneling down to a property level. If you ever get the opportunity to have conversations with a Mr. Marriott, or now David actually has just taken over as chairman, or Tony Capuano, the CEO, I mean, they're inspiring individuals to be around. The culture that they have established, that they put forth is phenomenal. But how are we making sure that is trickling down all the way to a property level so that culture, that foundation is in place to make people want to be a part of it? I think too many times right now, we are hiring like crazy to get us through the day. And all we're doing is getting back in this repetitive cycle of the same challenges that we've had before, which got us into kind of the mess that we're in now, from our teams realizing that, do they really care about my future? Do they sincerely care about where I'm going to be in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years? Or am I a body that's filling a void that they have at this exact moment? And that's why I'm here. And I think that it's a tough place because there's a massive need right now, right? And we can't look past that. But I think that the team members that we're hoping come back are looking at us going, I need you to care. I need to know that there is culture here. I need to know that you're not just thinking about today, you're thinking about the next 5, 7, 10 years of my progression. Where am I going? What are the things that are important to me? Is that something that's also important to you? And so I can't press enough and to say that the culture that you establish at your company and your organization or your hotel or your restaurant or your bar or whatever it is that you're managing or leading is vitally important in your ability to get people to want to be a part of your team, to have longevity with them, and continue to build that brand that you're trying to establish.
100%. And how do you balance that? Because it is a give and take, right? Like as an employer or as a brand, you're giving and giving and giving. You're giving resources, you're giving time, you're giving money, hopefully mentorship, hopefully, like you said, that let's look at the next 5, 7, 10 years of your career and map out, what does this look like? Is that here? Is that, getting you different departments? Is that getting you all this other stuff? Is this sending you to a hospitality school or some online course or certification of some sort? There's a lot of give. And I feel like, maybe with this whole shift, and Grant, like to give it some context, I think when COVID hit and everyone was doing the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? Like, oh, 2 weeks off, like that's fine with me. And that 2 weeks kept getting extended and extended. It turned into like, oh my gosh, was I really happy? Like I think a lot of people realized they weren't happy, and not because maybe their job was horrible, bad culture, but it just wasn't something they wanted to do. They maybe are doing it for someone else, or just because it paid well, but it didn't spark any passion for them, whatever it may be. So again, there's a lot of that, but how do you balance as an employer, like the give take relationship where it's like, okay, hopefully I give enough and I invest enough into my staff. How am I going to make sure that I see that return through the business, through reviews, through repeat guests, through loyalty, through revenue? Is there a way to even track that type of give and take measurement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of this is understanding that the mantle of leadership, like it's not easy, and sometimes it's not fun, and it feels like there's a lot of giving. It is my job every day to wake up and give to my team, clear the path for them, set them up for success, invest in them, look for ways to make sure that I'm helping them get to where they want to be. That's part of the job of being the leader of the organization. And I think the more that we are able to attach the passion of our organization, and we hire individuals that are aligned with what our passions are, and we're speaking the same language, and the things that are important to me as the leader are the things that are important to them, all those things start to spark stuff inside them that goes well beyond just the function job that they're doing on a day in and day out basis. They're working for something that's a bigger purpose. And I think that's important in establishing that foundation and that culture that we were just talking about. When you go back and look at brands like Starbucks, Starbucks was set at in the early days. The people that worked there, they weren't working at a coffee company. They were working at a company that was going to change the world. And they were doing it for more than just the day-to-day job. They felt like they were a part of something bigger than just coming in and doing the job that most people say that's what you're paid to do. And I think you see how Starbucks has completely blown up, obviously, over the years and become this massive global brand. And I think that a huge part of that was based on the culture that they established at their core that gave purpose for those individuals that were there that had nothing to do with necessarily the function of their job that they were doing each day. And I know for us at Ellis Adams Group, we worked very hard to make sure that during the hiring process it's more than just, are you great at at that day to day that we might need something done? I need to know what your long-term goals are. Where do you want to be? What are you super passionate about? What are your hobbies? What are those things to make sure that we have alignment in everything that we're doing, so you feel like you're part of something so much bigger than just the function of your job? And that's extremely important for us. And I think it helps. It helps give a bigger purpose to your team, and I think their happiness level with their jobs continues to increase. And so there's a lot of benefit to that. Can we attach that to an actual ROI? Yeah, I mean, there's companies out there that find ways to do this, and there's actually some crazy enough. There's some apps that are in play now that look at kind of mental health in your team and how much you're investing in them, and what's the ROI look like, and how many missed days of work do they have compared to prior, and things like that. So there's stuff out there to track it. But I think if that becomes a focus for you, and it's tough, because I think especially in our industry, we live in the whirlwind, man. We live in
100%.
I mean, you're just trying to get through today. You're constantly in the weeds. And so it's difficult many times to think beyond that and say, forget today. Am I investing in my own company to make sure that I'm thinking about tomorrow, next week, next year, the next 5 years? And the more that you're able to transition and do that, the more your team benefits from it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I kind of said it better myself. And before I really want to touch on this one point that you brought up in your Forbes article, but I think before we get to all the good stuff of the conversation right out the gate, I do have a question in regards to markets. Was there any market particularly that kind of shocked you when it came down to performance with occupancy, revenue, and even an increase of staffing? Like, where was there a property that's just like, oh my gosh, you're kind of like the golden child, or maybe just an area that you weren't expecting that kind of stood out over the last, let's say, it's been 6 to 8, maybe 12 months. No, it's not been a year, but it's been 6 to 8 months since we recorded together last time. So has there been anything that kind of shocked you since then?
It's still exciting to see crazy enough, the luxury segment continues to flourish. I mean, if you look at all the trends, the luxury market has continued to do very well in the midst of this chaos. As you look into the summer months, and I think Tony Capuano actually just was interviewed this in the past week about this, and his exact words were they're expecting a huge boom this summer in that luxury segment. And I think it goes against everything we would think should be the case with the pandemic and places closing and no jobs and all these things. Yet people are going to spend even more money than they were spending before in the luxury segment. And so I don't think that's something that we would have predicted early on. But it is definitely something that has held true throughout the course of this, and is continuing to show signs of continued growth as we go through it. So that's exciting, especially in the world that we live in for what we do. I mean, I love hearing that for sure.
Yeah, especially on your guys' group of projects and portfolios. I'm sure that, especially because luxury is such a big risk, because in order to provide luxury in different types of service and amenity types and all that stuff, it costs a lot more money as an operator or as an owner. And so, do you make that investment and take that risk? Most people, I would say yes, but executing on it, then seeing that continue, you're gonna spend more money on your stuff, but you're also gonna have higher paying guests that will bring in more revenue anyways. So it's kind of a give and take risk, I think.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. If you really want to talk about, which segment, which brands actually put more money to the bottom line, luxury definitely is not the route you want to go. If you're doing this strictly from an investment standpoint of I want to make money, I want to have a great return, luxury is probably not the direction you want to go with your portfolio. But when you're talking about hospitality at its core, especially when you talk about my group specifically, it's we eat and breathe it. We live it every single day. And again, I think I've said this to you before. and I hope everyone understands, when we talk about luxury, don't think of that from a cost standpoint. Don't think of, oh, Chris just continues talking about luxury, he's bougie. That's not what I'm referring to in any way, shape, or form. When I talk about luxury, I'm talking about your ability to create those personalized moments and experiences for those you come in contact with. I don't care if you're at a Ritz-Carlton, a St. Regis, if you're a Moxie, a Courtyard, it does not matter. You can have a luxury experience in any place. You can have a luxury experience going into Walmart. It's about your ability to create that moment for someone else. And so, yes, the brands that we primarily work with in that space are very specific. But for us as a team, we're very clear that we won't only work with high-end brands that cost a lot of money. We're looking to work with brands that are trying to have those exceptional moments for people that they come in contact with, and that's what we believe luxury truly is.
100%. Yeah, I remember when you said that, and it's also it just reminds me, because I follow you actively on Instagram and all the other platforms, and it's just really cool to see, because like it's not just Chris is bougie or whatever, but it's like it's a lifestyle. I see you with your team, and you guys you're testing the products, you're coming up with concepts. I just saw the other day you guys are in a studio doing video, creating these new pieces of content. And so it's really cool to just see that it's not just luxury this, luxury that. It's really just living it, right? And in a good way.
It is, man. It is. It's day in and day out. And, don't get me wrong. I think just like everyone else, social media does a very good job of painting a picture. So people are like, dude, your life. Yeah. And I'm like, it's not exactly how Instagram shows it, right? I mean, I think there's still, I'm on the West Coast, is where I'm based, yet, I'm on conference calls that start at 7, 8 a.m. on the East Coast, and that's a normal day for me. And so I don't think people realize the amount of work that goes into to create and to create the culture that we're talking about. But by putting in the hard work and doing those things, it gives us the opportunity to do things that maybe other brands don't get to do. And we get to see things that other brands may not get to see, or experience things that other people don't get to experience. But that's not by luck. That's not by just getting a good job. That's by really putting in the work and staying true and consistent in what we do, what we say, how we do it, what we deliver to our client, standing behind what we say to get to this point. And we're very fortunate to continue to we've continued to grow. I mean, since we talked last time, I think we've got at least 2 more people that have been hired on our team in the past few months, and more coming on. So I mean, we're fortunate that we're continuing to grow within the markets that we have.
Yeah, and it's cool because I think, what's that famous saying? The harder you work, the luckier you get, right? I think like that's a pretty common term, and you're 100% right. That it is not what social media makes it look like. So I love that kind of preference, because a lot of people, even for us, like on the media side, right? Like our job is to create content and have these conversations and to make it sound, look, feel pretty. But as I'm like recording this, even like I'm in my half-make studio / bedroom. So, it's not the most prettiest thing. It's a constant, up at whatever time of the day to get prepped and prepared and to set everything up and do all this other stuff. It's like you said, hard work, dedication. And the harder you work, the luckier you get. But I do want to read a quote from your article that was in the Forbes, based off of the conversation of the industry needing to pivot. And we'll kind of go into some conversation from here. But the quote is, "I think the time is now to disrupt. The time is now to force change. Maybe it's new investors. Maybe it's a different way of driving the bottom line, but change must happen. And it must happen now. The hospitality industry must take on its biggest challenge yet, revolutionizing how business is done in a centuries old industry." Sorry for butchering that reading. I'm not the best reader. But the question right under that statement or that quote is, how does a worldwide industry pivot? And I love the word pivot because recently I've been getting into Friends a lot again. And so I think of that Ross episode. They're telling
you best. The sofa pivot. Going up the fire escape.
Yes, the best one. But how does a worldwide industry pivot? And I think that question, for some reason, I don't know why the way you worded it there kind of struck a chord with me, because like I talk about the industry all the time, and I have like friends and family and people in the industry that we always say the industry, but for some reason adding the worldwide industry. So this isn't like some local operation that's just going to pivot and the whole world's going to change. It is a huge effort in coordination to get everyone on the same page. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people, even after COVID, even after almost losing or actually losing their business, have still had that mindset of, well, this is how we've been doing it for 20 years. Why would we change? This is how it always is. We let the OTAs be 80% of our revenue, or whatever it may be. Like, there's certain statements, comments that go in that line. So I guess, and I have some points from that article that you mentioned, but for you, how does a worldwide industry pivot?
It's $1 million question, man. I think anybody that knows the exact answer to this make a ton of money right now. It's going to take time, for one. This is not something, and it's tough because, you know, we live in a world right now, and social media has really put this on us, that we live in an instant society. Like everything, we pull out our phones, and with the push of a button, we get instant information. And that's only pushed us as a culture to have very little patience for anything. So when you're looking for change, when you're wanting something to be different, the expectation is I could click something on my phone and it just happens, right? Because that's the world we currently live in. And in a situation like this, that is not the case. We're not going to have something that just, oh my God, this is the answer, and everyone does it, and now boom, there's our new industry. This is the way we do it now. This is going to be little things that are going to continue to happen over time until you gradually see it. It could be years where we look back and go, holy crap, do you remember when we used to do X and now we do it so different? But it might not be one of those things where it's this aha moment and the whole industry changes on a dime. I believe this is going to be small things that are going to continue to happen, that you'll have small changes that over time will reap big results. And that is very difficult because it's hard to measure it. It's hard for us to see it. And it's hard to tell that story and narrative to those that you're hoping want to get into this industry, right? It's difficult when new people come to the hotel and say, yeah, I hear you need people. I'm interested in talking to you. What are you doing different now than what it was when I used to work in the industry, that I just don't want to come back to that? And I don't know that anyone has a great answer to give them right now. In fact, they're probably going to give them an answer that's even worse than it was before. Actually, we need you to come back and work harder than you did before. I'm not going to pay you any more money. All those things, right? So it's not an easy conversation, but I think the reality is you're going to continue to see, and you're going to hear probably some of the smaller organizations that it's easier for them to, in your famous word, pivot a little easier or quicker than some of the big companies out there, to try some stuff that others aren't willing to try, throw things against the wall because there's a little bit less risk for them maybe. And if those things start to work, you might see a trickle effect start to happen, for whatever that one thing is that they were able to adjust. I don't know that we're going to see some massive, oh my God, there's the answer, everybody do it, we're better now. I think it's going to be very little things that add up over time to where you and I, a decade from now, are having a conversation going, holy crap, man, look what happened. Look how far we've come. I didn't even realize the differences that were being made. I think it's going to be a little bit of a slow process, even though things will be happening to affect change. I don't know. I hope that makes sense.
Totally. Well, and I just I think you and I had the same kind of conversation the first time, but going into like Gary Vee or like these bigger entrepreneurs, right? Like the reason why I find this very fascinating is that like people will come up with a concept or they'll come up with like a marketing campaign and be like, why is it not, why are we not seeing the numbers behind that we thought we would see? And then, who knows, let's say most people give up that type of campaign or that type of marketing or whatever the message is, and they move on and they try to keep going through that cycle of, all right, messaging, posting, announcement, whatever, and then no reaction. Okay, the next thing, and repeat and repeat and repeat. And really, it could take that same message, but just 100 touch points for it to actually connect and click. And who knows how long those 100 touch points are. So to kind of go into what you're saying is like, I love that you said, a decade from now, because a decade from now, I would love to pull up this conversation again, revisit it, and redo another episode with you to go into those changes, because I think it just like you said, it takes time. It takes, kind of like being a dead horse, where you just got to keep pushing that message through. I know for like companies like Muse, because I'm a big tech guy, so I love technology in the space. I think we're far from perfect when it comes to tech, but I think
we're years behind the other industries in tech.
Yes, but I do think we're in the right direction. I think if we get more people, maybe outside of the industry, that learn the operations and figure out how can we enhance it. And I want to mention Muse, because like for me as a property management software, and if anyone listening to this is from Oracle, I'm sorry, but Opera is the worst. Like, it's the most outdated software I've ever seen, and I'm only 27, so I barely got to experience dial up and all this other stuff, but that's what it felt like. And companies like Muse that are able to take something so different and make it into, hey, instead of selling a room or a bed, you're selling a space, right? So let's not only just sell space, so it could be a co-working spot, you could rearrange your whole lobby, it could be a hostel, you could do whatever. But then also tracking as like a CRM, like, okay, why no longer are the days of having to remember the guest because the front desk person remembers the guest, but your profile is able to travel with you as a traveler. I think that for me is like, why has nobody done that previously? But long story short,
they do have some of those systems out there. I think the bigger issue is, are they used to their fullest extent? I look at back in the day with Ritz-Carlton, we had a system that it collected preferences on guests, and it was attached to your profile. So any Ritz-Carlton in the world that you checked into, all of that information traveled with you, like you're talking about. And there's a similar system now that Marriott has in place. And I think, but it's kind of the old adage, what is it? Good info in, good info out. The only way it really works is if we're actually putting it into motion. Do we have strategies and systems in place with our team on the ground that make it easy for them to say, oh my God, I just took care of Will in the restaurant and he's adamant of the way he likes, his coffee. And it's kind of weird, but he has to have it this way every single morning. That's a cool preference to put in, but if they don't have access to it or they're not comfortable with getting that information to someone, then this system that we have, that's a global system that can travel with you, really serves no purpose. So I think there's probably a little bit of a disconnect of how are we doing, there's a disconnect across the board, but we talk about we have great processes in place for our people. This is one of those things where we probably don't have a great process in place. We haven't created behavioral patterns around it. And as a result, we don't reap the benefits of a system that's there to help us that we just don't take advantage of.
100%. That's a really good point. I didn't look at it that way from the initial thoughts of this conversation, but no, that's really good. It kind of,
it's funny. Clarity. The other thing that, as you were talking about, with Gary Vee specifically, right? And he's a big proponent on, if you need to post constantly. If it doesn't work, keep doing it. It's not going to happen overnight, kind of a thing, right? And I think that's such a great message, because like I said, we live in a world where we need instant gratification. I need instantly. I mean, I have no kids out there that if they post and they don't get X number of likes in a certain amount of time, they pull the post down, right? Because they need instant gratification. And when I look at being an entrepreneur, starting your own business, I think one of the biggest reasons why people fail is because they don't get instant gratification. Most people go into this with some big idea thinking, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to be a billionaire in 2 weeks because everyone's going to want my idea. And then 6 months later, you're half broke, you've mortgaged your house, and you're like, okay, it's not working, screw it, I'm out. And that's why most people don't last as an entrepreneur or business owner, is because they're not willing to suck it up and take it on the chin and fight and fail and move forward and push and keep going and all those things that it's necessary in building a brand, because I didn't get instant gratification. I didn't get an instant success. I'm not the next Gary Vee, so I just can't do it. And this, I think that's a huge issue that we have across the board. Even when we look at our owners and hotels, they want to roll out a program, a marketing campaign, a promotion, an LTO, something. And if they don't see immediate results, we'll move on. Well, let's change the breakfast experience, right? Let's not do buffets anymore. Well, if it doesn't work in the first 3 weeks, all right, put the buffet back. Well, that's not really how you build a brand. And that's a slippery slope to go down, and a struggle that a lot of our brands have.
Yeah. Well, 100%. And not going to lie, like totally being open and honest here, but that is the biggest struggle that we face with advertising on podcasts or with any type of media. When it comes to, it's like, oh, we didn't get the click through that we wanted, or, we spent, let's say $2,000, but when they got $300 worth of purchases, nope, not worth it. And it's like, man, it doesn't work that way when it comes to the type of advertising that this is. It's taken years for people to really you just have to be hitting them at the right time, because who knows, they may have heard your ad 3 years ago when it wasn't relevant to them, but if they keep hearing your ad and then all of a sudden it becomes relevant to them, they're more likely to continue to listen in, tune in, become a brand, I wouldn't say ambassador, but more knowing of the brand, right? More familiar. They'll discover you on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it may be. And then they actually become an ambassador after using the product and being like, oh, this was relevant for me. It took me 3 years, but at the end of the day, that was 3 years of being able to be at the right place, the right time with the right person. So it kind of comes into that whole standpoint. Like a lot of people, just expect instant results when, the numbers may be great on the analytics and saying the audience is this size and blah, 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 but it has to be relevant, and it has to be continually a drip effect of being relevant. So that way, when the right time does occur on that person's life, whether they're listening to a podcast ad or they're on Facebook and they have the right, Facebook ad pop up, or even TikTok now, a lot of people are going that route, and it just takes the right time, the right person, and the right moment to make it relevant.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would, for anyone that's going to be listening to this, if you take this information and we take it out of marketing and say, well, if I'm going to go back to my property and I'm wanting to do something new, I have a great idea and I need to get buy-in from people. How do I do it? How do I get my leader above me or the owner to not try and pull the plug after 2 weeks on something? And I think the biggest thing I would tell people is make sure that you have a way to track what you're doing. Right? You've got to have some scoreboard that you're looking at that is able to show some type of ROI. And that ROI might take a while, but I think the more that you give people something to look at in data, and the call every week is how did last week go? And you're just kind of, well, I still have high hopes for it. I think it's just going to take a little longer. I think that we missed the mark by not just having something that is with structure around it, that says this is how we're going to track it. Here's how we're doing it. This is what we did. This is what our expectations are. And I think just having some type of scoreboard to be able to hand over to someone is many times what keeps them from believing in what we're doing, because they don't know how committed we are to it if they don't have a scoreboard in front of them that says, well, do you even know how well you're doing? And I think that the one thing I would push on anyone that might be listening going back to want to launch something is make sure that you're not just launching your idea. Make sure you have a strategy, a plan, and structure around it, that you're able to speak to it week in and week out. That's not just you putting pretty words around what's going on, but you have something tangible that you can hand over to people. And that tangible thing might not be a bunch of numbers and results on the front end. It might take a while, but you've got some way that you are watching progress. And it might be flatlined in the beginning. Hell, it might go down a little bit in the beginning. but you've got some way that you're handing people say, we've got a plan and I've got a way to track it. And there's something that we can stare at each week together to watch how this is going to win in the long run.
I love that. And uh, just from, yeah, man, that's good. That's really good. The thing that with that is, don't also be afraid to learn more about the tracking tool or to learn what you can implement that's better to continually evolve the process. If you're not seeing stats, doesn't mean you have to switch to a new platform or to a new thing, but try different stuff and see what works, and then see, like, do some research. The big thing that we were doing with Spotify buying all these companies, Megaphone to Pod Sites to all these other things, is like, okay, well, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know existed out there. How can I look at something like this or a similar tool or a similar process that can help us? And that stuff, it's fun because Chris, I'm sure you can relate, but it takes you down a crazy rabbit hole, and you're looking at yourself like 3 hours later being like, oh my gosh, I didn't do anything I was supposed to do other than just go down this rabbit hole. But it's good. It's good to learn that. It's good to practice and to be aware, because then the next meeting, you may not have a ton of results, but who knows, you'll be able to say, but I did learn that if we try this tool or if we implement this into our tracking, blah, 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 like then we can see better results in more detailed, granular way. That itself is also really important, I think, for people just showing, like you said, Chris, the dedication to the project, to the idea, is all in that as well.
It also gives you great information that lets you evolve what your initial plan was to what it might need to be, right? I think you look at any company, I look at my brand now versus what I thought it was going to be 20 years ago. I mean, it continues to evolve and change, and that's because we use great data. We listen to our clients. We see where trends are going. We just try to stay ahead of the curve and everything. So we have to make sure that what our plan was, that's the foundation. And I think the core of who my company is and my pillars of who my company is that were established many years ago are still there, and they're not going to change. That's who we are at our core. But I think sometimes the path that we're on, sometimes the missions that we put ourselves onto are going to change and evolve based on what's going on. And our ability to have the willingness to listen, learn, and do that, and not stay so entrenched on that initial, well, this is what it has to be. Use data, use that information that you're now tracking to say, hey, you know what? I'm seeing a trend here. We're now going to pivot slightly. We're going to, instead of taking a hard right, we're actually going to take, just a slight right. And you're going to be able to tweak what your ultimate vision is to get the most out of it. And that can only happen if you have great data and information that are at your fingertips to help you make those decisions.
I love that. I literally couldn't have said it better myself, Chris. Seriously. And not to quote Gary Vee again, but you don't be afraid to make changes. Don't be afraid to change. Just because you said you're going to do something doesn't mean you have to stick to it. If you know and you see it's not working, like you can make those changes in order to adapt. It doesn't have to be a hard right, like you said, but it can always be a nice soft.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think Gary's a smart guy, so he's done a few things right.
Yeah, anytime I can quote him, I usually do. It's like, all right, it's a good person to have as a reference. But awesome. Well, Chris, thanks for joining me on the Spotify Live. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I know there's a couple points that maybe we didn't get to dive into, but just for anyone listening on the live or on the replay, good place to go to learn more about you, learn more about the Ellis Adams Group. Obviously, I'll make sure that we plug everything in, but just want to make sure that you get the opportunity for your time to shine.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, you could obviously go to www.ellisadamsinc.com. Follow me on Instagram at @ChrisAdams_EAG or Ellis Adams Official. Love to have engagement. Please reach out to us. Anything we can do to assist anyone. We always want to be available and do whatever we can to help and impact people's lives. So follow us along on the journey.
I love it. And then just for fun, I don't know if the name rings a bell for you, but on Instagram, I got a message from Travis Reiner, who was a former head of Homes and Villas at Marriott, says, Chris and I have known each other since we've worked together at the Ritz-Carlton Buckhead back in 2007. He was associate director of meetings and events, and I was a front desk agent. That's pretty cool. Not
It's a
gonna lie.
long time ago. He's good people, man. He's done some really good things over the years. I think he just got another promotion. The guy's great.
Yeah, no, seriously, super cool guy. He was on the show when he was with Homes and Villas, but now he is director of ops in his favorite market, which I believe is like kind of DC, Maryland, Baltimore.
Yeah, I think he's Northeast.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for the time, and I will keep in touch with you soon, my friend.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.